My name is Ali Taha, and my question is, Christians make the claim that Jesus Christ fulfilled over 300 messianic prophecies. I personally believe that Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, is prophesied, but this is more about Christ for now. I want to ask, because they believe Isaiah 42, for example, Deuteronomy, the prophet like Moses, is about Christ. And then it goes further into, Isaiah 9, Daniel 9. They claim all of these are about Christ. How would Rabbi respond to that?
So, as it turns out, this is really simple arithmetic. Christians do insist that there are hundreds of prophecies in the Hebrew Bible, in what they call the Old Testament, that all clearly, unambiguously demonstrate that Jesus is the Messiah. What you are asking is not something that Christians just came up with, but the Christian Bible makes that claim. The Christian Bible, the canon itself, claims that if you just read your Torah, if you would have believed in Moses, you would have believed in me because he wrote about me. John chapter 5, verse 46. I mean, there couldn't be anything more clear than that. So the Christian Bible is claiming that the proof and truth of Christianity, the veracity of the claims of the church, can be demonstrably illustrated through the Hebrew Bible. Luke 24. Now, when I say Luke 24, you should be going, whoa, that's the last chapter of the third gospel. It is. We're told that if you just look at your Torah, your prophets, and your writings, you will find demonstration, clear passages that demonstrate the Messiah is supposed to die and rise on the third day. See Luke 24, verse 44 through 46. And it goes on, and Matthew and Paul, they're all quoting all sorts of passages. So let's do some rudimentary arithmetic together, okay? Here's how it goes. 300 times 0 equals 0. It's just that simple. So all these passages that we're told demonstrate that Jesus is the Messiah, that it's not just they're not there. It's not that they just don't appear anywhere. It's that passages have been ripped out of context. They're always ripped out of context. For those of you who are concerned about knowing all the verses that missionaries use, there's really a very simple way to address them, and that is to read it in context. So if you're shown a verse, Isaiah 7:14 or whatever, all you have to do is just read that whole chapter. If you do that, you'll immediately know that somebody is trying to spiritually scam you. It's all. So every proof text that missionaries use is ripped out of context completely. All of them are. Many of them contain passages that have been mistranslated. Well, why don't you just look it up in the Hebrew? Well, the church doesn't teach Hebrew to its kids in Christian schools, so they have corrupt translations that render these passages in a Christological fashion. How do they do that? And that is by ignoring what the original text says, the Hebrew text says, and instead looking to an English translation or a Septuagint. So I'll share something with you that you as a Muslim will really appreciate. Christians very frequently debate openly on the streets in Hyde Park in England. Muslims, they argue about all sorts of things, right? One of the things that Christians and Muslims argue about, not the biggest thing, but it comes up very frequently, is the integrity of the Hebrew Bible. very frequently. Okay, not all, but most Muslims think that Tanakh has somehow become corrupted. This is the only thing that Jewish people are very puzzled by, but that's not germane. The key is that when Christians are arguing with Muslims, their chief argument is this is not correct at all, and that the Tanakh is intact. The Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible, is completely intact. And this just comes up constantly. This is a big, big issue. What's very striking is if you had a Christian having this whole fight with a Muslim, defending the integrity of the Hebrew Bible, and then just turn around and start arguing with a Jew, they then will completely switch modes and say, no, but it says something else in the Septuagint. I'm not kidding, which is supposedly a Greek translation fashioned in about the year 250 BCE for the Alexandrian Library. Put together, assembled, translated by some 70 or 72 learned Jewish men. Okay? So they will claim that this Greek translation is what the writers of the New Testament relied on rather than the Hebrew, and it's superior to the Hebrew. Now, let me ask you a question. This is just the beginning. How could a translation ever be superior to the original text? That makes no sense. And therefore, in every civilized country, there's what's called a law of best evidence. The law of best evidence means that the original contract in the original language always is superior and more reliable than any possible translation. You follow? And if someone is appealing to a translation rather than the original Hebrew text, what they're saying is the original Hebrew text has been corrupted. And there are thousands and thousands of YouTube videos all trying to prove it. And it's all nonsense because the original Septuagint has been long lost. The original Septuagint, and I have a whole chapter on this. I actually write about this in both Volume 1 and Volume 2. I go extensively into Volume 2 of Let's Get Biblical, where I demonstrate it's only the 5 books of Moses that was translated into Greek originally. Today's Septuagint, which contains not just a putative Greek translation of all of Tanakh, but also includes the Svarim HaChitzainim, which means the apocryphal writings or the deuterocanonical texts that the Roman Catholic Church believes in. So it's such a ridiculous argument. So this is a very critical matter because the texts have been completely altered by the church, and Christians are speaking out of both sides of their mouths. To Muslims, they have one message: the Hebrew Bible's intact, right? Because they're going up against Muslims like you. And then when they're talking to Jews, they switch tactics completely. It's like you're talking to a politician. You're not talking to an apologist. These are really bad faith actors. Now, there are many people who just follow along this and they don't know any better. They don't know any better because the church ensures that none of them could read their Hebrew Bible in its original language. I remember living in Indonesia, which is home to the largest Muslim population in the world, and how proud Muslims were that their children could recite part or the entire Quran by heart in Arabic. Now, it's true that although this is something that Muslims take pride in, and I think every Muslim home I've ever seen has a Quran in Arabic, right? I think that, many Muslim leaders would want more Muslim kids to learn Arabic and to be able to understand it. So for an Orthodox Jew, reading biblical Hebrew, lahavdil, is like reading a newspaper. This is what we're taught right away from the moment we can. And this is so Christians, to their credit, are deprived. They're deprived of the original language, which is a very big disadvantage for them. And therefore, the church could make any claim they want because the verses are ripped out of context. Verses are the meaning of words are critically changed in a malevolent fashion, meaning it's not an accidental change. There are accidental changes. That's not what's going on here. And many verses are invented that don't even exist, including the verse in Luke 24, verse 46. There is no such verse. It doesn't exist. And it's, I say, corollary passage because I'm sure whoever wrote Luke copied this idea from 1 Corinthians 15, verse 3 and 4, claiming that Jesus' death and resurrection after 3 days in the tomb is in the scripture. It's just there is no verse like that. So any method possible to produce this magic show is done. Now the passages in particular I think is a good idea. You mentioned Daniel 9. Daniel 9 contains a prophecy that measures 490 years. Daniel's using a term of each day is a year. So a week, therefore, is 7 years. And 70 weeks is 490 years. And the period that comes into view for a prophecy in Daniel is not speaking. The angel Gabriel is explained to Daniel what is occurring is a measurement from the first temple, destruction of the first temple, destruction of the second temple, and there are two different anointed ones that come into view. One after 7 weeks, which is 49 years. So after the destruction of the first temple, okay, when Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babel, destroyed the first temple, that was the Temple of Solomon, somebody rises up who Tanakh says is a Mashiach, is anointed. And he gives the command for the Jews to return back to the land of Israel, to go back to Yerushalayim. There have been no Jews in Eretz Israel for 50 years, the only period of Jewish history since Yehoshua ben Nun that there were no Jews in Eretz Israel. There were no Jews in Israel 50 years. And he told them to go build the second temple. That's how the book of Ezra begins, incidentally. If you open up Ezra chapter 1, that's how it starts. Cyrus says, go back. Cyrus the Great. So there's your first anointed one, and then you have a second subsequent anointed one who is a priest who's cut off after subsequent 62 weeks. 62 times 7 is 434 years. It's really very simple. And then you have the destruction of the second temple, and you see the people of Prince come down and they just destroyed all. The sanctuary is destroyed. There are many people who like to it's not the Muslims or Christians are doing this, but in the academic world, it's a big problem with saying that there's a prophecy in the book of Daniel about the destruction, l'chorvot, Yerushalayim, is because they don't believe that Daniel was a prophet. So they will just say they have to stay muchachlema. How could Daniel know that? I mean, Daniel, who lived during the Babylonian exile, he surely couldn't know about anything. Even that they claim that the book of Daniel is a pseudepigrapha, chas v'chalila. It was written during the time of Hanukkah, so Hanukkah is 160, 66 BCE, that period, right? So it's more than 2 centuries before the destruction of the second temple. So they have to say that it means what Antiochus Epiphanes IV. I don't want to go into that. Everybody's got to rework it in order to conform to what they already believe. You understand? So just one other point about Daniel 9. The Hebrew word Mashiach appears in Tanakh, in the Hebrew Bible, 39 times. This is very critical. It appears 39 times, and when it appears, it is never referring to the Mashiach, and therefore translators render the word Mashiach, which means anointed, as anointed in the Hebrew Bible. But Christian translators, not all of them, there are some who have clean hands on this one. But the majority of them, in the 2 times the word Mashiach appears in Daniel 9, from 24 through 27, they translate it as Messiah. They capitalize the letter M, even though there's no such thing as a capital letter in the Hebrew language. There's no such thing as a capital letter in the Hebrew language. It doesn't exist. And they on their own capitalize it. And then they put the definite article in there, and there's no definite article in the original Hebrew. And they then get rid of what we would call today a semicolon and a senachta. That means conflated. It's a nightmare. I write about this extensively, so I'm not going to go into this very far. If you ask a Christian, when do you start counting, they can't even figure it out. As far as Deuteronomy chapter 18, let's talk about Deuteronomy 18. Here, Moshe Rabbeinu, Olav HaShalom, was set to die. Right? He wanted very much to cross the Jordan. He didn't even need to lead. He just wanted to cross the Jordan to come into the land of Israel. Why would Moses, a blessed memory, want to go to the land of Israel? The Gemara asks the question, like, why did he want to go? Did he want to go swimming in the beach, in the Kinneret, in the Yam Suf? No. He wanted to perform mitzvahs that you can only fulfill in the Holy Land. He wanted to go, but he couldn't. So another prophet had to rise up who was like Moses, and that's the prophecy in Deuteronomy 18. So it's very important to understand that the book of Deuteronomy, the 5th of the 5 books of Moses, really covers the less than 2 months of Moses' life. There are many commandments in the book of Deuteronomy that are not in the other 4 books, but the key to remember is the Sefer Devarim, the Mishnah Torah, whatever you want to call it, Deuteronomy, the second law. Deuteronomy essentially covers a span of the last 2 months of Moses' life. Okay, now Moses cannot cross the Jordan. Yehoshua ben Nun, rather, who was anointed by Moshe Rabbeinu, by Moses, our teacher, Olav HaShalom of blessed memory. It is his role, it is his task to lead the people across the Jordan opposite Jericho. And the people will follow Yehoshua just the way they followed Moses. Where does it say that? It actually says that explicitly. Joshua chapter 4, verse 14, and God exalted Yehoshua ben Nun in the sight of all Israel, and they followed him just as they followed Moshe Rabbeinu. And in fact, in Numbers 27, it's really, if it's hard to remember all these numbers, no pun intended. So just the last part of Numbers 27, beginning from verse 18, Hashem told Moses to take Yehoshua ben Nun, to anoint him, to lay hands upon him. Moses, in fact, gave Yehoshua his name. His name originally was not Yehoshua, but he gave him the name Yehoshua. He named him, he anointed him. The Spirit of Hashem was now upon him. And Moses did exactly what he was told. And at the end of chapter 34 of Deuteronomy, if I say chapter 34 of Deuteronomy, why is that significant? It's the end of Deuteronomy. It's also the chapter when Moses' death comes into view. Verse 7, Moses was 120 years old when he died. But the key is, look at the 2 verses later, verse 9. And Yehoshua ben Nun was full of the spirit of wisdom because Moses laid hands upon him. And the children of Israel listened to him, hearkened to him, as they did Moses. So it's very, very clear in the Torah itself that Yeshua was the prophet like Moses. Now, when it says like, it doesn't mean identical. There was no prophet who encountered God face to face and heard the voice of God in a completely conscious state other than Moshe Rabbeinu. No one had a higher level of prophecy than Moshe Rabbeinu. In fact, it's one of the 13 core principles of the Jewish faith is to know that Moshe Rabbeinu was the premier prophet of all prophets. And what he received from God, he was completely conscious. Every letter he wrote was directly from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Other prophets received prophecy, but they received it through usually while they were asleep, God spoke to them, like Shmuel in the beginning of the book of Samuel, named after him. He has a name. He runs to Eli. What am I hearing? Eli said, go back to sleep. God's going to talk to you. That's how God spoke to other people or through angels. We have many prophets who God only spoke to through angels. Daniel, as an example. Why not germane now? So that covers it very simply. Isaiah 53, forget about it. They rip it out of context completely. If they would read Isaiah 41, 42, 43, it's all Israel. Isaiah 41, 8, 9, Israel is my servant. So what happens in Isaiah 53 is out of context completely. One caution I give every time, 95% of Isaiah is poetry. You need to know that. If you're not sure, please open up a book of Isaiah right now and try to read it and understand it. There are some chapters that you would understand immediately right away. For instance, Isaiah 36 or 37. Those chapters are do not contain poetry. So there are exceptions. There are, 5 chapters that are written using standard prose like you would be reading the book of Joshua. But almost all of it is very dense poetry, and that's why I teach Isaiah, because I want people to understand it and appreciate it. And if a text is poetry, then you better read the context. Isaiah 42, openly we're told that the servant is a nation. It's a Brit Am. See Isaiah 42, verse 6. Where literally the servant is told in the plural that you're deaf and blind, right? So it's obviously not talking about Jesus or any Mashiach, any of those things. It's talking about the nation of Israel. A Brit Am means a covenant nation who is to be a like to the nations. See Isaiah 49, verse 6 as well. 49, verse 3 tells us that the servant is Israel. So Isaiah 53 contains 8 passages that are the soliloquy of what the Gentile nations will say when the true Mashiach comes. They'll realize they had made a terrible mistake. Verse 9 through 12 of Isaiah 53 is God speaking. So it's just all ripped out of context. What's the problem? The problem is that people don't know their own Bible. They really don't. Certainly not in the original language. So if they don't know their own Bible, so missionaries could it's what a magician does on a stage, except not as clever. It's more like a 9-year-old doing a magic show. You very often can see where the so-called magic is taking place. But all magic relies on distraction. Every magic trick, it's called a trick. When you're seeing a magic trick, you're not observing the laws of thermodynamics being suspended for the purpose of providing you with some entertainment. People can't float. They can't. The laws of thermodynamics won't permit it. You can't just produce new energy. So what happens is they have to use props. What do magicians use? They use props. And that's why it distracts you. You're looking here, and the magic is going here. It's all what it is. So all the Septuagint and Shmeptuagint, these are props that the Christian magicians are using in order to get you to worship idolatry. And just as the Torah says, don't do what was done in Egypt, don't follow it. Don't follow these props. Just look at the original Hebrew, look at the original text. And if you look at the original text, no missionary will ever be able to convert you to Christianity. It'll never happen. But you have to go back to the original. But the problem is, and the last point is, even those translations that are really excellent, they're not translations. They're commentaries, because Hebrew and English are two languages that are entirely different. They come from two different families of languages. They have no relationship at all. It's not like Italian, Spanish, French. So even though I don't speak these languages, I know that they're from the same family of languages, right? And very frequently, people from Brazil can understand people speaking Spanish in Argentina, because it's not that way. And because of that gulf, because the Hebrew language, biblical Hebrew, frequently uses what's called a null copula, which means words are missing and have to be added in to make sense. The structure of the noun and the adjective is reversed. Don't ask what's going on. So it has to really be rewritten, even if you're trying your best. A translator has to rewrite the text in a way that's understandable to the English reader. So all translations are a commentary. Then you have on top of that complete corruption. And that's what the Christians are stuck with. So do understand that all translations are a commentary. Translators are just one thing. I have a lot of pity on them because they're torn, because they would like to keep it as close to what it says. The problem is it's just not readable. So they have to adjust it so it should be enjoyable for the reader to read their translation. You follow? And that's what translators are torn between. They're torn between remaining loyal to the original text and making the text readable. And those two never intersect. They're always in tension with each other. So just go back to the original Hebrew, stop with Septuagints and all this stuff. Those are all props that allow magicians to perform illusions, and that's all they are. They're illusions. Anyways, assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much for calling in. Shalom. If you enjoyed this program, please like and subscribe.
אדון עולם אשר מלך בטרם כל יציר נברא לעת נעשה בחפצו כל אזי מלך שמו נקרא ואחרי ככלות הכל לבדו ימלוך נורא והוא היה והוא הווה